this can't be it, right? Like, there's gotta be something else coming. Metroid Prime 4 maybe sneaking in December? Is that still viable, or do they usually not release games in December? Like, Kirby Air Riders is cool, but as a main holiday title on the year of Nintendo's new console launch, a year where there are very few exclusive Switch 2 games even coming out, they decided to opt for a spin-off of Kirby. A spin-off series that they hadn't even touched in 20 years. Now, come on, man. Like, this is too easy. Okay, wait, let me back up before I get started. I like Kirby Air Riders, or Air Ride, rather, on the GameCube. I'm not really part of the cult following by any means. Even as far as the Kirby franchise is concerned, like, I've played a few of the games, but I haven't played all of them, and I wouldn't really consider myself a massive Kirby fan by any means. As a matter of fact, I haven't even played Forgotten Land yet, but that's primarily because I've been saving that for whenever I eventually do cover Kirby as a franchise in my retrospective channel. But despite that, I liked Kirby Air Ride. I started playing it way after it was actually popular. I always felt like it was somehow too simple and too complicated at the exact same time. Like, I was able to pick it up, but I had to put some time into it to actually learn how to use it. Like, in theory, the game is simple. It's just a simple button control and the thing drives by itself, but it feels unnatural until you get the hang of it and then you start to enjoy it a little bit more. The problem I always had with it is I couldn't convince anybody else to enjoy it as much as I did. So even though I put in the time and effort, I tried to introduce it into our game nights and just nobody was biting. Nobody was interested. I also liked Smash 4 on the 3DS, how they had the game mode that was kind of inspired by the city trial run. Like, my point is that I understand what the game is. I understand why it's loved by many people. And of those many people, most of them are in Japan. But even despite that, this should not be, it cannot be the big major holiday title that the Switch 2 is giving this year. And this is not even me being a hater. I ask any one of you right now that are watching this video, if when you were watching the Switch 2 Direct, your mind told you that Kirby Air Riders was going to be the big holiday title of 2025, and you've held on to that belief from the day of that Direct until now, please share, because I don't think anybody thought this was going to be the big game that was released just before Thanksgiving in the States. Like, I thought that Metroid Prime 4 already had an uphill battle to move units for the Switch 2. And in my mind, I was like, oh, you know, like Metroid Prime 4, it's a popular series, but Metroid doesn't always sell the best on these consoles. And I was expecting a lot of Nintendo fans to be like, are you kidding me? Do you know how long it's been since the last Metroid game? And then I would have been like, yeah, I'm a Metroid fan, but the reality is it doesn't move units this way that like Mario or Zelda would. But like now I'm thinking they would be better off having Metroid be the main holiday title. Unless of course like they're both going to be coming out in the same window and they're both going to be the holiday title. But Nintendo doesn't usually do that, number one. And number two, it actually could work because the Kirby game would be way more popular in Japan and Metroid would be way more popular here in the West. Plus you got Pokemon coming out a month before, so the three of those together could really push this to the end of the year. And I mean, these were the games that were announced during the first Direct. Granted, 2 out of 3 of them are Switch 1 games that are just up-resed for the Switch 2. But still, looking at it from a Nintendo lens, that's a pretty big end of the year. But as it stands right now, all signs are pointing towards this game potentially being the last big game to release for Nintendo by the end of 2025. Now, I have a theory. I don't know if this is necessarily a conspiracy because Nintendo is a company and this is how they usually operate. I feel like Nintendo is saving some of their bigger games for when they have a larger user base. And that's a big part of the reason why we haven't gotten any big announcements yet for the Switch 2. Especially when you consider that Donkey Kong Bonanza didn't exactly shake up the world the way Breath of the Wild did for the Switch 1. And seemingly doesn't come as close to Odyssey in the way that it revolutionized and popularized the Switch. Not that it didn't do well, but it wasn't like that massive revolutionary title that a lot of people were trying to tout it out to be before the game came out. But the difference is Bonanza's going to be around. Like, it's going to sell. Even if the Switch 2 does not do that well, realistically speaking, most people are going to buy into the Switch 2, and they're going to get Bonanza at some point. I don't know that it'll necessarily reach the heights of some of the B-tier games on the Switch, but it definitely won't be considered a failure by any means. And it might actually have a bigger push later on in its life, depending on how the Switch 2's life cycle spins. But outside of Mario Kart World, which is obviously going to succeed because it's Mario Kart and it's also bundled in with the console, at least for now, and Bonanza, which will inevitably be at least within the top 20 discussion, if not the top 10, I'm wondering if they're saving some of the bigger hitters for when they can have a bigger number showing because of those games. So like, let's take Forgotten Land, for example. Like, Forgotten Land was a massive success. It's actually the best-selling Kirby title in history. which, mind you, sits at just under 8 million. And then you have the Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy, that was 5 million. And then you have in third place Star Allies, which is also a Switch title. Now, on one hand, Star Allies had fewer games to compete against because it came out in 2018. So you could potentially consider that that helped it be as high and as well performing as it was. But on the other side of things, in 2022, when Kirby and the Forgotten Land came out, part of the reason it hit 7.5 million is because the Switch 2 user base was as massive as it was. So the percentage of the user base buying it was actually not as high as Kirby Star Allies, but it sold better. So when it comes to Kirby Air Riders, on one hand, you could be like, well, is this thing going to actually move Switch 2 units? And I mean, it might in Japan. It just kind of depends on where the stock situation is for the Switch 2 by the time those games come out. But at the same time, they might be thinking if they were to release Kirby Air Riders as the third major Switch 2 exclusive in 2025, then it might outperform Star Allies alone just because of the lack of competition there. I don't know. I'm genuinely kind of scratching my head about this one. Like, it seems like a bad choice, right? I can't be the only one thinking this. There are a lot of rumors flying around that Metroid Prime 4 could potentially be delayed, and that might be why this is going to be the holiday title. And likewise with the Hyrule Warriors game and Splatoon, those games are kind of being rumored to being later in the winter in 2026. And again, part of those rumors could be because they're waiting for the Switch to have a larger user base in order to make more sales when those games come out. But at the end of the day, those are just rumors. Like, we don't know exactly when Metroid Prime is going to be coming out. But if the Metroid Prime 4 rumors are true and it's gotten stuck in development hell yet again, maybe they had to decide that Kirby Air Riders was going to be the big title released in November. Maybe Kirby was actually supposed to come out end of August or early September, and they had to shift for that reason. I don't know, like I said, these are all theories. They're guesses. I'm just grasping at straws here because none of this makes sense to me. And I don't think I'm saying anything too absurd either. Like, this is not a conspiracy. This is just me trying to figure out what their thought process is. Because legitimately, I do not think that they planned on going into the winter of the launch of the Switch 2 with Kirby Air Riders being the primary holiday title that's going to be coming out. Trust me, if you want me to get into conspiracy levels, we can get into conspiracy levels. For example, here's one that I've been holding on to. I don't think that PETA actually made a complaint to Nintendo about the cow having to remove its nose ring. I think that was a marketing ploy by Nintendo. They worked with PETA and were like, hey, send us a letter so people know that Mario Kart World is out on the Switch 2, so people can go and buy the Switch 2. Yeah, see, that's a Nintendo conspiracy theory that I would like attached to my name. Not they're releasing Kirby Air Riders in November because they want to make more Switch 2 sold in order to have better games released when the console is doing better. Anyway, as far as the game itself is concerned, I think the reaction that I'm seeing online is just about exactly what I expected. Like, you have two sides of it. You have people that are sitting there talking about how it's the best game in the world and everyone's going to understand finally why Kirby Air Ride is a phenomenal game. And I have a very big feeling that's a very small vocal minority, at least here in the West. And then pretty much everybody else is like, okay, cool, I'm glad you're happy you're getting that game, but I'm definitely not buying this. Like, for starters, it's $70. And I realize that when people hear $70, most of them are like, well, yeah, that's the new norm. We expected that Nintendo would let $70 be their new norm. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And everybody else that does not want to spend $70 on Kirby Air Riders is also right. As a matter of fact, this game will very realistically be dropped down in price very quickly, just like DK Bonanza was. Not necessarily by Nintendo, but by a lot of the retailers that will put it for like 10 to 15% off in order to get some of that initial hype. The other thing is, I'm seeing a lot of people talk about how good the game looks, and I don't see it necessarily. And I thought at first, I was like, maybe I'm being a hater, but then I saw a lot of other people online saying the same thing. They're like, this does not look that phenomenal. It looks like a Switch 1 game. Actually, I think there are a lot of Switch 1 games that look better than this game. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it has a good art style, but it also feels very bland. And I realize part of that is because it's being compressed on the YouTube video, but you can kind of tell. It's very simple, and it's not nearly as high-tech and gorgeous as a lot of people are trying to make it out. At least. I'm not massive on analysis when it comes to this stuff anyway. I'll wait for like Digital Foundry to get a hold of it and tell us all of the intricate little details about the game itself. But I mean, as it stands, it looks very bare bones. And one of the things that I'm actually would be worried about if I hypothetically had a Switch 2 and if I hypothetically wanted to buy this game, which I do not for either of those at this price, they didn't show any split screen. Now, in fairness, they did show that it would be 1 to 4 players on a single Switch, but it didn't necessarily say which game modes would support that. And my big fear is that it's not going to be 4-player split screen 60 frames per second, because the original Air Riders was 60 frames per second 4-player split screen. And there are other games that are 4-player split screen on the Switch 2 itself that run at 60 frames per second. Mario Kart is not one of them, obviously. So it's not exactly like this would be impossible, especially considering how limited this game actually is. Like, you're only dealing with 6 drivers at a time. They also didn't show anything about that top ride mode, and I think that would have been a lot of fun to be included in the game as like an 8-player party mode. And they might still include the top right version, and that might be the only single Switch 4-player mode because it doesn't require split screen. But I don't know. I assume there will be split screen. I have worries that it won't be 60 frames per second. And it's not really that I care about it that much, but when they don't put it at 60 frames per second with 4-player split screen, they start limiting things when you go online because the competition is unfair. And then also you get into the discussion of why you're spending so much for a console that's supposedly strong, but it can't run a pretty bare bones Kirby title at 60 frames per second, 4-player split screen, when they could do that on the GameCube. As far as the actual presentation went, I thought it was pretty good, to be honest. I don't think it would be fun for a lot of people, but if you're somebody that enjoys watching Sakurai ramble on about the stuff that he's passionate about, it's pretty enjoyable. The takeaway from how it went, I think, was exactly like I expected it to be. Like I said, anybody that's actually played Kirby Air Ride before probably walked out of this one knowing exactly what he was talking about, and they're like, oh, I'm glad he broke it all down. Because this game has an image of being very simple, right? But I think there's a lot of people that are not necessarily being very vocal about it right now. A few of them have been vocal about it, obviously, that were probably very overwhelmed when they saw all of the different mechanics and maneuvers and types of controls that this game has. Like, in a lot of ways, because of how simple the controls are with just one button, or I guess in this case it's now 2 buttons, it does actually get a little bit more complicated because it's not controlled in the way that you would expect it to control. And the way that people expect it to control is like Mario Kart, even though this is not necessarily a racer only, since City Trial is very much the main attraction. But the issue is that most people will see this game as a racer. No matter how much you try to press it as not being a racer, most people buying Kirby Air Riders will look at it and be like, oh, it's another racer on the first year of the Switch 1's launch. Which means when you look at the opening launch window of the games that are made by Nintendo themselves that are exclusively for the Switch 2, you have 2 Zelda ports that were effectively originally built off of an engine that was made for the Wii U, both of which have had massive price increases, and do not include any DLC with that price increase, and not to mention one of which was actually a launch title for the original Switch. So you got those 2 Zelda ports, basically, 2 kart racers, 2 cheap tech demos that probably should have been pack-in titles or at least free with the purchase of NSO, and then 2 DLCs, one of which many people have already decided is not worth the $20 price of admission. And it's an $80 price of admission if you don't already own Mario Party Jamboree from the Switch 1, and the other of which the jury's still out on. We won't know until it comes out later this month whether or not the Kirby and the Forgotten Land Switch 2 edition is anything more than like an extra 45 minutes of gameplay. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, obviously, but I don't expect whatever they're adding to that game to be anything larger than an hour or 2, because with the way Nintendo is pricing things, I highly doubt they're going to put that much effort in there just for an extra 20 bucks. But obviously, we'll see how that actually looks when it comes out. And then all that's left is like Pokemon and Metroid, both of which are games that you can still buy on the Nintendo Switch 1 as well. And that's if Metroid actually comes out this year. It doesn't really paint the best picture, and outside of a very few people that are lying between their teeth, I think most people expected more from now and through the end of the year. And we might get that more that people are looking for during the September Direct, if there's a September Direct. The way things are going, I wouldn't be surprised if the September Direct is like a Metroid Direct talking about how Metroid's going to be awesome when it releases in January. Look, this might be something that comes back and bites me later, but I actually don't think we're going to get anything Mario related for the 40th anniversary. Like, we got something for the 25th anniversary, we got something for the 35th anniversary. I don't know that we're necessarily getting anything for the 40th. I'd like to be proven wrong because more Mario is always good for me, but I'm saying this as a Mario fan, I don't feel very optimistic about it, and it feels like the type of rumor mill hype that's being generated from the fan base, like when there's like always going to be a Direct coming up. Well, this is the Mario anniversary, so there's got to be something coming up. Then I don't know, I don't feel very optimistic about it. But yeah, like I said, I could be proven wrong on this one, and I would be happy to be proven wrong. Years of tempering my expectations as a Nintendo fan have taught me that we probably should not expect something amazing, and then that way we're happier when we do get something amazing. And then for like 85% of the time, when it's just an underwhelming Direct, there are no hard feelings. All of the brand new Nintendo fans that decided to buy a Switch 2 will soon learn this as well. But as far as Kirby Air Riders goes, there are two things that I would like people to pay attention to because this seems to be an ongoing pattern here. Check what the hype levels are for this game. Try and figure out what people are comparing it to, how much they think it's going to sell, because this is not going to sell that well, in my opinion. And I don't know, I don't expect it to review that well either. But I'm trying to keep an eye out for all of the people that are going to push this as if it's going to be as big as Bonanza, for example. Because when this game inevitably underperforms based off of their pre-launch estimations that these fans are going to be making, and I come out and say that, hey, like this thing is not doing as well as everybody was saying it was, I fully expect the goalposts to be moved on their end, just like they've moved the goalposts with the numbers that the Switch 2 has reached, just like they moved the goalpost with the numbers that Bonanza reached, where they're all going to come out and be like, oh, come on, we knew it wasn't actually going to do that well. It is just a Kirby spin-off after all. But, you know, prior to the launch of the game, that's when all of their fun predictions are going to be coming out. So I'm going to keep my eyes out for those again, and we'll talk about it after this game launches and see if it does that well. The other thing worth pointing out is that seemingly there's no AI in this game, specifically the generative AI that Sakurai was glazing a month ago, despite the fact that Nintendo fans have all become experts in Japanese and decided that it wasn't him praising it. I mean, it is a pretty simple design anyway, so even if he did use generative AI while making this game, I'm sure they'd be able to build around it and make it so that it doesn't seem like it's all made by a robot. Although given the way that Sakurai works, he might actually be a robot, but you know what I mean. It could have been really bad, like Kirby Air Riders has an AI as the first two letters. The headlines would have written themselves, Kirby AI Riders, made by Sakurai AI. Okay, sorry, I'm done. Anyway, look, this game looks fun. I actually think it's going to be a lot of fun. I just don't think it's going to do that well, and I don't think it should be the holiday title that Nintendo is pushing. And it might not be, like something else might come up, but right now it doesn't look good. Like, I know that Sonic Crossworlds is supposed to come out next week, or is it next month rather? And the Switch 2 version got pushed back to the holidays. And I think Sega's actually doing a really good job with this, because if you buy the Switch 1 version now, you'll be able to upgrade to the Switch 2 with a $10 fee later on. And all the rumors about them being on a game key card seems like they completely backtracked on that. So Sonic Crossworlds might actually be a good buy for the Switch 2 at that point, although I would probably suggest you wait a few months because it's a Sega game, so it'll go down in price pretty quickly. But my point is that if Sonic Crossworlds is going to be a holiday title that's going to be coming out on the Nintendo Switch 2, and I know Kirby Air Riders isn't technically a racing game, but you know, it kind of is. It's like the cousin of a racing game. Between those two games, it seems like if you're a Switch 2 owner, you'd be better off buying Sonic Crossworlds. I'm just gonna say it. At least right now, before both games come out and before they get their reviews. Anyway, look, that's all I got for today. Gamescom was cool. I don't have too much to talk about. I thought it was better than the Partner Direct, even as like a Nintendo person. The games that were announced and shown that were coming to the Switch 2 seemed like they're better choices than what was announced during the Partner Direct. I think it's hilarious that there are some games that are going to be coming to the Switch 2 now that Nintendo fans would have hated on in the past, but that's fine. We can ignore that. Either way, I think that's all I got for tonight. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you guys on the next one.
キャラモノのレースの海コースって青い海、白い砂浜、ラテンが流れていたりしてのどかなリゾート風味になりがちですが、このカービィのエアライダーはそんなに甘くはないです。ご覧ください。